Her eyes never left his, even as the gun wavered in his grip. They were not the eyes of someone afraid of death. They were the eyes of someone who had survived too much of it already. The veins in her arms throbbed under sunburned skin. Her lips cracked from thirst, her dress torn from running. But her spine was unbroken. Behind Marcus, the dry earth quaked faintly with the sound of hooves. Riders were coming. The dust cloud on the horizon was no storm. It was men, armed and hungry for whatever they thought belonged to them. His gut twisted. She wasn't out here by accident. She was running from them. "Shoot me if you must," she whispered, voice shaking but unbent. "But if you let me live, I will give you sons to carry your name, daughters to fill your house with laughter. I will bear you life. Just don't send me back." Marcus's jaw tightened, his throat thick with a weight he couldn't swallow. He remembered the feel of his wife's hand on his chest, the tiny cry of the baby who had only lived 3 days, the fever that had stolen them both. He remembered the silence afterward, how it grew fangs and haunted every corner of his land. Could this be an answer to his prayer? Or was it the devil himself testing him? The thunder of hooves drew closer, rattling his bones. He had seconds to decide. He lowered the rifle, tossed the canteen at her feet. "Drink," he rasped. "Then get up. You're coming with me." She snatched the canteen, water spilling down her chin as she gulped. Her hands shook, but her eyes softened, just for a moment. Relief, gratitude, and something fiercer glimmered there, as if she had just won a war only she understood. Marcus turned toward the cabin, his voice sharp. "Stay low. Don't speak. If they see you, they'll kill us both." She pushed herself to her feet, towering above him even as her wounded leg dragged in the dirt. Each step left a smear of blood in the brittle grass, but she followed without a sound. The hooves were closer now, the shouts of men echoing across the open land. Marcus clenched his teeth, gripping his rifle until his knuckles turned white. 3 years of silence had ended, and in that silence's place, something dangerous was being born, something that could save him, or destroy him. Marcus dragged the heavy barn door shut, heart pounding as dust clouds drew closer on the horizon. The wooden latch groaned under his grip, and his mind screamed at him to send the giant woman away, to cut her loose before her pursuers reached his land. But when he looked at her, standing tall despite her wound, jaw set with a fire that was equal parts fear and defiance, he knew it was already too late. The riders were nearly upon them. 3 silhouettes, guns glinting, shadows stretching long against the dying sun. The smell of iron and dust carried with the wind, bitter in Marcus's mouth. Inside, he muttered. Alara shook her head. "If they find me hiding, they'll burn this place and kill you for sheltering me." Her voice was hoarse, but there was no hesitation in it. Marcus clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to people talking back, least of all someone who looked carved from the earth itself. But something about her words struck true. He had lived long enough on this land to know what kind of men rode with that much dust at their backs. The riders pulled up at the gate, horses snorting, leather creaking. The leader, a man with a scar that carved through his cheek like a brand, spat into the dirt and leaned forward in his saddle. "Evenin', Stone," he drawled. "Heard you been keeping company. Big company." His eyes cut toward Alara, who stood in plain sight beside the barn. "That one there belongs to us." Marcus tightened his grip on the Winchester slung across his shoulder. His throat ached with the urge to lie, to deny, to send them on their way. But the woman didn't flinch, didn't lower her gaze. She stood straighter, her broad shoulders squared, as if daring him to turn her over. "She stays," Marcus said, his voice like steel scraping against stone. The scarred man smirked. "Didn't figure you for a fool, Stone. Word is you lost your wife and babe to fever. Shame. You could have kept to your silence. Now you're about to lose everything else." His men laughed, mean and sharp like broken glass. One of them cocked his revolver. The sound snapped the air. Alara's hand dropped to the crude knife strapped to her thigh, her muscles coiling like a mountain cat ready to spring. Marcus stepped forward, raising his rifle, barrel steady. "You step foot past that gate," he said, "and none of you leave whole." The standoff stretched long and thin. Horses stamped, dust swirled, sweat rolled down Marcus's temple. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the scarred man spit again, his grin splitting like a wound. "We'll be back, and when we do, you'll wish you'd never set eyes on her." He yanked his reins, wheeled his horse around, and the others followed, hooves thundering as they disappeared back into the horizon, leaving a trail of red dust in their wake. Marcus lowered his rifle, shoulders tight. Alara hadn't moved, her knuckles white around her knife handle. Only when the dust settled did she exhale, her chest heaving. "They won't stop," she said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Then neither will we." The rest of the day blurred into work. Hard, endless work. Marcus pulled boards from the shed, nailing them across windows until his arms ached. He stacked sandbags against the porch. Alara, limping but unrelenting, dragged straw away from the cabin to keep the fire from spreading, her hands blistered and bleeding. Every time Marcus glanced at her, he saw a woman whose body bore scars that spoke louder than words. Wounds from battles he couldn't imagine, pain she refused to let kill her. By dusk, the ranch looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The smell of cut wood hung heavy in the air, mingling with sweat and blood. They sat in silence by the fire, the glow casting sharp shadows across their faces. Alara sharpened her knife with slow, steady strokes, while Marcus cleaned his rifle, every motion careful, deliberate, ritualistic. "You've been running long," Marcus finally said, his voice low. Her dark eyes lifted, meeting his. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, "Too long." Her words carried the weight of years, of nights without shelter, of screams swallowed by the prairie wind. Marcus wanted to ask more, but he didn't. He had lost enough to know some wounds weren't ready to be touched. The fire crackled, spitting sparks into the night. Outside, the prairie stretched silent and endless. But Marcus felt it in his bones. The quiet was temporary. When he finally lay down, rifle within arm's reach, the silence was heavier than ever. And yet, for the first time in years, he wasn't alone inside it. He wasn't sure if that made it safer or more dangerous. At dawn, the prairie woke red, the sky bleeding fire across the horizon. Marcus rose with the sun, eyes gritty, body sore, but his spirit sharper than it had been in years. Alara was already awake, hauling buckets of water from the well. Her face was streaked with dirt, her braids loose, but her eyes burned with the same defiance he'd seen the night before. He wanted to tell her to run, to vanish before the riders returned. But when she glanced at him, jaw set, shoulders unbowed, he knew she wouldn't. And deep down, he realized he didn't want her to. The sound came then, distant, steady, growing. Hooves. Not 3 this time. More. The earth trembled. The horizon blurred with red dust. Marcus's blood went cold. He grabbed his rifle, heart hammering, and stepped onto the porch. Alara appeared beside him, knife in hand, standing tall though her wounds still bled through the cloth wrapped around her leg. Together, they faced the horizon as the riders drew closer, their shadows swelling like a storm. Alara's voice was steady, calm, almost defiant. "If this is the end, Cowboy, then we end it together." Marcus's jaw clenched. He raised the rifle, barrel catching the light of the rising sun. "Together," he said. The riders thundered forward, the sound swallowing the earth. Dust billowed, guns glinted, voices shouted. And in that moment, standing side by side with the giant bride, Marcus Stone felt something he hadn't in years. Not fear, not silence, life. The sun climbed higher, turning the prairie gold and merciless. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, his rifle warm under his grip. Alara stood beside him, a towering shadow, her breathing steady, her knife flashing at her side. The rumble of hooves shook the air until it seemed the whole earth trembled beneath them. 5 riders this time. 5 hard men with sunburned faces, revolvers strapped low, rifles slung across their shoulders. Their leader was the scarred man from before, his grin sharper now, crueler. He reined his horse to a halt just beyond the gate, dust curling around him like smoke. "One last chance, Stone," he called, voice carrying across the yard. "Hand her over, and you keep your land. Refuse, and we'll salt your ground with your own blood." Alara's shoulders stiffened, but she didn't move back. She stepped forward instead, her bare feet planting in the dust, her dark eyes fixed on the men like firebrands. "I am not yours to take," she said, her voice low but strong. The men laughed, but it wasn't humor, it was hunger. The scarred man leaned forward in his saddle, his grin like a knife. "Then we'll take her from your corpse." Marcus didn't wait. He lifted the Winchester, sight steady, and fired. The crack of the shot split the air, deafening, sharp. The bullet slammed into the dirt inches from the leader's horse, sending the animal rearing, screaming, nearly throwing its rider. Chaos erupted. The men shouted, guns drawn in a heartbeat. Bullets whined through the air, splintering wood, tearing into fence posts. Marcus dropped behind the sandbags, his heart hammering, firing back with a grim precision. Each shot echoed like thunder, the smell of gunpowder stinging his nose, smoke curling into his lungs. Alara didn't flinch. She darted toward the stable, her long strides carrying her across the open ground as bullets snapped past her. She yanked free a spear she'd carved from a fence post the night before, its tip hardened in fire. Her muscles coiled, her chest heaving, her braid whipping like a banner as she planted herself in front of the barn door, daring the men to cross the yard. One rider broke forward, spurring his horse hard, revolver raised. Alara moved like lightning. With a guttural cry, she hurled the spear. The weapon whistled through the air and struck the man square in the shoulder, ripping him off the saddle with a scream. He crashed into the dust, his gun skittering away. The horse bolted, riderless, into the horizon. The others cursed, firing wildly, but Alara was already moving, ripping the spear free, her arms slick with blood and sweat. She looked like something out of a nightmare, or a legend, half woman, half storm. Marcus fired again, dropping another man's hat clean off his head, the bullet grazing his scalp. The rider yelped, clutching at the wound, and wheeled his horse away in panic. The scarred man roared with fury, spurring forward, rifle leveled. Marcus ducked just as the bullet screamed past his ear, shattering the cabin's porch rail. He rolled, came up firing, his shot grazing the man's thigh. The scarred man howled, but didn't fall. He aimed again, and then Alara was there. She lunged from the side, her massive frame colliding with the horse's flank, her spear flashing. The animal screamed, rearing, throwing its rider. The scarred man hit the ground hard, the rifle flying from his hands. Alara stood over him, spear raised high, her shadow swallowing him whole. Her chest heaved, her muscles straining, her face a mask of fury and pain. For a moment, the man's grin faltered. For the first time, he looked afraid. "Do it," Marcus shouted, his voice raw. But Alara froze. Her hands trembled, her breath ragged. She had killed before. Marcus could see it in her scars, in her eyes, but something in her fought against it now. She lowered the spear just as the man scrambled back, clutching his wounded leg, and crawled toward his horse. His surviving men pulled him up, retreating in a cloud of dust and curses. Bullets snapped wild in their wake, but none came close. Within minutes, the horizon swallowed them whole, leaving silence behind. Only the moans of the wounded man Alara had struck remained, his body sprawled in the dust. Marcus staggered forward, chest heaving, rifle still hot in his hands. The smell of smoke and blood clung to the air. He looked at Alara, towering, trembling, her spear dripping red. And for a moment, he saw not just a survivor, not just a woman. He saw a partner. "You saved this ranch," he said, his voice hoarse. Alara shook her head. "We only bought time." She was right. Marcus knew it in his bones. The men would be back, and next time they would not come with 5. They would come with 10 or 20. And when they did, it wouldn't just be bullets. It would be fire. The wounded man groaned again, clutching at his bloody shoulder. Marcus raised his rifle, aiming steady. But Alara stepped between them, her chest rising and falling, her voice sharp. "No." Marcus's jaw clenched. "He'll bring them back." "Then let him," she snapped. "Killing him now will not stop it. It will only stain you more." For a long moment, Marcus's finger hovered on the trigger. Then he lowered the rifle. The man's wide eyes flicked between them, terror stark in his face, before he scrambled to his feet and stumbled toward the horizon, vanishing into the dust. Alara turned, her eyes locking onto Marcus's. There was fire there, and sorrow, and something unspoken that burned hotter than both. "You risked everything for me," she whispered. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat thick. "Maybe I was ready to risk it. Silence has been my only companion too long." The wind shifted then, carrying the scent of rain from far off, mingling with the sharp tang of blood and smoke. Above them, the sky darkened, clouds heavy with storm. Alara lowered her spear, her chest still heaving, her voice barely above a whisper. Then we stand together. Until the end. Marcus looked at her, the firelight flickering in her eyes, and nodded. Until the end. The storm rolled closer, thunder rumbling low, like the growl of a beast waiting to strike. And somewhere in that storm, Marcus Stone felt the first spark of something he thought long dead. Not fear. Not despair. Hope. The storm broke with a scream. Rain pounded the roof of the cabin, slashing sideways across the prairie, turning the dirt yard into sucking mud. Lightning split the sky, stark white against the black clouds, and thunder rolled so heavy it shook the walls. Marcus stood on the porch, rifle in hand, his breath steaming in the cold air. The world smelled of wet earth and iron, a bitter taste on his tongue. Beside him, Alara gripped her spear, the rain slicking her braids to her back, her muscles trembling but unyielding. The storm made her look like something otherworldly. Not just a woman, but a figure carved out of defiance and fury. The sound came then, faint at first, swallowed by the rain. Then louder, steadier, until it became a rhythm no storm could hide. Hooves. Marcus's chest clenched. He counted them by instinct. Not 3, not 5, more. A dozen at least. The riders were back, and this time they had come with enough guns to grind his ranch into dust. The glow of lanterns bobbed in the storm, shadows of men swaying in the saddle, rifles raised. The scarred man rode at the front, his grin wider than ever despite the wound that made him limp in the saddle. "Stone," he shouted over the rain, voice jagged and cruel. "You had your chance. Tonight, your ranch burns, your bones scatter, and the woman is ours." His men cheered, their voices carried like knives on the wind. Alara spat into the mud. Let them come. Marcus's heart hammered. He remembered the graves on the hill, the silent years, the nights he begged for someone, anyone, to answer him. Maybe this was the answer. Not peace, but the chance to fight for something again. The first shot cracked through the storm. Splinters flew from the porch rail as a bullet slammed into the wood. Marcus dropped to one knee, returning fire, the Winchester kicking hard into his shoulder. One rider spun from the saddle with a scream, tumbling into the mud. Chaos erupted. The raiders surged forward, hooves churning mud, bullets snapping through the rain. Marcus fired again and again, each shot deafening, the smell of gunpowder burning his lungs. Alara moved beside him, her spear flashing, her body a blur of power and fury as she hurled it into the chest of a rider who came too close. The man toppled backward, his lantern shattering in the mud, fire hissing out in the rain. Another rider leapt from his horse, charging the porch with a revolver in hand. Alara met him head-on, her massive frame slamming into his. They crashed into the mud, his gun firing wild into the storm. She wrenched it from his grip, her fingers crushing his wrist until he screamed. With a roar, she drove her fist into his jaw, dropping him cold. Marcus barely had time to breathe before another bullet tore past his ear, close enough to singe his hair. He ducked, fired back, and watched a rider crumple into the mud, his horse bolting wild into the storm. But there were too many. For every man they dropped, 2 more pressed forward. The air was alive with the hiss of bullets, the crack of thunder, the screams of horses and men. "Marcus," Alara shouted, her voice raw against the storm. "They'll burn us out if we stay pinned." She was right. Already, 2 raiders had broken toward the barn, lanterns in hand. The smell of oil cut through the rain. If they lit the straw inside, the fire would take everything. Marcus cursed, heart pounding, and sprinted across the yard, mud sucking at his boots. Bullets tore through the air, splashing mud at his heels. He dove into the barn just as a lantern smashed against the doorframe, flames licking upward. The heat roared, smoke choking his lungs. He grabbed a pitchfork, drove it hard into the chest of the raider scrambling through the door. The man went down with a scream, his blood mixing with the rain. Marcus kicked the burning straw aside, stamping it out with his boots until smoke stung his eyes. Another figure filled the doorway, the scarred man himself, revolver steady. His grin was wide, cruel. "This ends now, Stone." Marcus's rifle was gone, lost in the scramble. His chest heaved, his body shaking. He reached for anything, his hand closing on a hammer left on the workbench. The scarred man raised his revolver, the barrel gleaming in the firelight. A roar split the barn, not thunder, not gunfire. "Alara!" She barreled through the doorway, her spear clutched like a weapon of war. She struck the scarred man broadside, sending him crashing into the straw, his revolver firing wild into the rafters. The thunder outside swallowed the sound. Alara straddled him, her muscles taut, her spear pressed to his throat. Rain plastered her braids to her face, her eyes blazing like coals. "You will not take me," she hissed. "Not again." The scarred man's grin faltered, his bravado cracking under the weight of her fury. His hand clawed for the revolver, but Marcus was faster. He kicked it away, sending it skittering across the floor. For a heartbeat, time froze. Rain hammered the roof. Fire hissed in the straw. Thunder shook the walls. Alara's breath heaved, her hands trembling on the spear. She could end it now. One thrust, and it would all be over. "Do it," Marcus rasped. "End this." But Alara froze, her eyes wide, her chest trembling. She had killed before, Marcus knew. The scars on her body told those stories. But something in her eyes spoke of a vow she'd made long ago, a vow to herself, to her sister, to the memory of what had been stolen. Slowly, she lowered the spear. "No more," she whispered. "I will not be what they made me." The scarred man's chest rose and fell, terror flickering in his eyes. Marcus hauled him up, slammed him against the wall, his voice low and fierce. "Leave. Tell your men this land is no man's to claim but mine. And if you set foot here again, I'll bury you myself." The man's grin was gone. His face twisted with hate, but fear kept him silent. He stumbled out into the storm, clutching his side, his men dragging him up onto a horse. One by one, the riders retreated, their shadows swallowed by the rain until the prairie lay empty again. Marcus stood in the doorway, chest heaving, rifle in hand. The storm raged, but the gunfire was gone. Only the hiss of rain and the crackle of dying flames remained. Alara dropped her spear, her hands trembling, her body shaking as the adrenaline drained from her. For a moment, she looked as if she might collapse. Marcus caught her arm, steadying her. Her skin was hot under his hand, her breath ragged. "You're safe," he said softly, the words rough in his throat. "We're safe." Her dark eyes lifted, meeting his, and in them he saw not just strength, not just survival. He saw pain, grief, longing, and something more dangerous than all of it. Hope. Slowly, her hand closed over his. Her voice was a whisper, almost lost in the storm. "You risked everything for me." "What?" Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight. "Because I've already lost everything once. I won't lose again. Not you." The storm howled around them, but inside the barn, a different silence settled. Not the silence of grief or emptiness. A silence full of breath, full of life, full of something neither of them dared name aloud. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus Stone didn't feel alone. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Alara believed she might belong. The rain fell harder, washing blood into the mud, quenching the flames, scouring the earth clean. Together, they stood in the doorway, side by side, watching the storm. And in the heart of Westlov, something new was born. When the storm finally broke and the prairie breathed again, the ranch did not feel like a place rescued by bullets. It felt like a place reborn by two people who refused to run. Marcus walked the fence at dusk, palm on each new post like a prayer. Alara followed beside him, taller than the horizon, her stride still uneven from the wound, her eyes bright with something she had nearly forgotten: tomorrow. They did not speak of destiny. They spoke of small things that make a life. Where to plant beans, how to set a snare so the fox wouldn't find it, how the wind smells different before the rain. He taught her the names he had given the hills. She taught him the names she had given her scars. They buried the ashes of what was meant to destroy them and planted hope in its place. And when night came, they sat on the porch steps with the door open, letting the lamplight spill into the yard like a warm river, the sound of the world settling. Horses breathing, crickets stitching the dark, two hearts learning how to beat together without fear. It was not a fairy tale. It was something harder and truer, a vow forged in mud and lightning, in restraint and courage, in choosing mercy when vengeance begged for a voice. If you have ever been told you are only what hurt you, hear me, you are more. If you have ever stood at a door and wondered whether love is worth the price, hear me, it is, when you choose to protect it like a home and honor it like a name. This is Westlov, not a town on a map, but a promise on a porch. A place where a widower set down his rifle and a giant bride set down her fear, and together they built a future sturdy enough to hold their grief without breaking. If this story reached you, if a line, a look, a breath made you feel less alone, stay with us. There are more fires to walk through and more dawns to meet. Tap subscribe right now and turn on the notification bell so YouTube lets you know the moment the next Westlov tale arrives. Drop a comment and tell us which moment you carried with you. Your voice keeps these stories alive.